In 2012, a herd of wild elephants marched for 12 hours to reach the house of a man after he died of a heart attack. They stayed there silently for 2 days. Exactly 1 year later, the herd again marched to his house to mark the anniversary. The man was South African conservationist Lawrence Anthony. The story began in 1999 when Lawrence Anthony received an unusual phone call. Would you like to adopt a herd of wild elephants? He had recently become the owner of a private game reserve in South Africa. The herd then had 9 wild elephants which had gone rogue and even managed to break down electric fences. Lawrence Anthony was their last resort. If he didn't take them, the entire herd, including 2 babies, would be shot down. What happened instead was that he took them in, saved their lives, and they enriched his. It's an incredible story told by Lawrence Anthony himself in the book The Elephant Whisperer. Let's not confuse this book with our own Oscar winning documentary that was released in 2022. That was a wonderful documentary, but this is a completely different story. To find out more, let's switch on the reading lamp. Hello, I'm Ashu, and on this channel, I review books and talk about reading in general. Shall we have a look at the details of today's book?
Facts and figures.
The Elephant Whisperer is a non-fiction book, a memoir written by Lawrence Anthony along with his brother-in-law, journalist Graham Spence. It was first published in 2009 by Sidgwick and Jackson, and this updated edition that I bought a few years ago was published in 2017 by Pan Books. It's about 400 pages long and is available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook formats. Today in 2024, the paperback costs about 200 rupees on Amazon. Unfortunately, as of the day of making of this video, the audiobook was not available on Audible India. I obviously read this particular paperback copy. Now let's talk about the actual contents of the book. But as you know, no spoilers, no worry. Just
The cover story.
the first chapter of the book begins with Lawrence Anthony and his ranger David trying to stop poachers from killing Nyalas, the beautiful African antelopes on Thula Thula. In 1998, Anthony bought an old run-down game reserve in Zululand. It was 5,000 acres of primal Africa teeming with wildlife, and it used to be a hunting ground for the rich jet-setting crowd. But once Anthony and his wife Francois became the owners, they named it Thula Thula, which is the Zulu word for peace and tranquility. They put an immediate stop to the hunting and instead began working on wildlife conservation. They built a small luxury eco lodge near the banks of the Enselini River in order to support their ambitious plans for wildlife conservation. It had been just about a year or so since Anthony became the owner of Thula Thula that he received that phone call that I mentioned in the beginning from a fellow conservationist. She told him about the herd of 9 wild elephants from another reserve. The owners of that reserve were fed up with the herd because they were troublesome. The matriarch of the herd had worked out how to break through an electric fence. The entire herd had a tendency to break out of enclosures and escape. On one hand, Anthony had only recently become the owner of Thula Thula. He was already dealing with cunning poachers, and he was afraid that the elephants would be an additional attraction for the poachers because of their ivory tusks. He would also have only 2 weeks to make all the arrangements before the elephants would come to Thula Thula, which included building a boma or an enclosure strong enough to keep a herd of wild elephants inside. It had to have an electrified fence that would have a current mild enough not to hurt the elephants but strong enough to act as a deterrent. On the other hand, if he refused, they would all be killed. So, obviously, Anthony said yes. The Zulus have a saying that if it rains on the inaugural occasion, the event will be blessed. The day the elephants arrived at Sula Sula, it poured in buckets. Just as the trailer entered the gates of the reserve, one of its tires burst with a loud crack. To the tired elephants inside the trailer who had been cooped up for more than 18 hours, it probably sounded like a rifle shot. They panicked and started thumping the inside of the trailer like a gigantic drum. The wheel was somehow changed, and the trailer had barely moved a few yards when it again got stuck in jelly like mud, spinning round and spewing mud and going nowhere. Anthony, Francois, and all their staff, soaking wet with rain and mud, desperately tried to move the trailer so that the elephants could be shifted to their boma before they broke out of the trailer in panic. That would have been a disaster because if the elephants escaped from the reserve, they would be shot dead. After an epic effort, the elephants were finally transferred into their boma. An exhausted Anthony left, hoping to finally drop into his warm and dry bed for some much needed rest. He noticed that all the elephants were lining up at a corner of the boma. They were facing due north, the exact direction of their previous home. The next morning, they were gone. They had broken through the electrified boma at night and escaped. This is only the beginning of the story. I'm getting goosebumps telling you about just the first few pages of the book. You need to read the book to find out what happened next and how and why Lawrence Anthony became known as the Elephant Whisperer. Without telling you the story, I'm going to tell you why I think this book is worth your time.
Speaking my mind.
Let me tell you right now, just off the top of my head, that this is one of the most goosebumpy non-fiction books that I've ever read. Lawrence Anthony was born and raised in the South African subcontinent. He grew up playing in the old rural Africa, running barefoot under the big skies in Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi, finally settling down in Zululand, South Africa. The USP of this book is Anthony's first hand and deep knowledge of Africa and his easy, fluent writing. Page after page is filled with keen observations about the land, the flora and fauna, the behavior of not just wild animals and humans, but also the behavior of plants. In one place, he writes about how plants communicate with each other. Plants. The book is full of information that could easily belong in a field guide, but it is woven so beautifully within the storyline that it doesn't read like a field guide. There are subplots in the book that touch upon the different tribes, their culture, beliefs, wildlife conservation, and you learn so much, but it's definitely not a dry textbook. The main story is about the relationship between the elephants and Anthony. Anthony had the best interests of the elephants at heart, but the elephants didn't know that. So, how did he manage to communicate this to the elephants and get them to trust him? When I was reading the book, I kept thinking of how at times we find it difficult to get along with other human beings because they are different from us in terms of their outlook, values, lifestyle, whatever. And then there is Anthony, who went to great lengths at a huge risk to his own life and limb at times so that a handful of elephants that no one else wanted would live. Not just live, but thrive. It's important to note that he wanted to save their lives but not tame them. He wanted to help but without interfering with nature. This message of peaceful coexistence comes across in a completely non preachy manner in the book. Anthony does not blow his own trumpet. In fact, in one of his interviews, the co author, Graham Spence, has mentioned that Anthony was not keen on the Elephant Whisperer title for the book. He probably thought it was pretentious. Anthony says in the prologue itself that it was the elephants that whispered to him and taught him to listen. There are many noteworthy passages and descriptions in the book, but I'm going to read out one quote that is so important to this story. Lawrence Anthony says,
Quote unquote.
communication is not the preserve of humans, it is the one thing that is truly universal. It was probably this outlook that made him so successful in connecting with the elephants. I love the quote because when you're out in the wilderness, you realize the truth of this statement. You see moms fiercely protecting their babies, whether they are tigers, dogs, rabbits, or birds. You see monkeys and deer in the wild, warning others when a tiger is on the prowl. And most of us have seen lines of ants passing by each other, talking to each other with their antenna. We think we are the most superior beings on earth, but read the book and the intelligence of the elephants will floor you. On a separate note, I must tell you this. Have you heard of the Baghdad Zoo rescue? In 2003, during the Iraq War, the zoo was in shambles. Some of the animals roamed the streets of Baghdad. Many were stolen to be smuggled. Many more animals died of starvation and sickness. It was Lawrence Anthony who flew to Baghdad from Thula Thula in order to run a rescue operation with the help of locals and many other soldiers and aid workers. He writes about it in one chapter of The Elephant Whisperer, but he has also written a completely different book dedicated to that story called Babylon's Ark. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my TBR list. Let me know in the comments if you've read it or if you would like to see an episode dedicated to Babylon's Ark. Now it's time for the LINEDSCAPE rating of today's book.
LINEDSCAPE Rating.
LINEDSCAPE is an acronym, a short form for a 10-factor rating system that I have devised in order to make my book ratings and reviews methodical and consistent. There's a link in the description. I'll post it to a more detailed video about the LINEDSCAPE rating system. You can check that out. So, here goes. L for language. The language is deceptively simple and compact with an easy flow to it. The no frills style suits the powerful content perfectly. 10 on 10. I for impact. I'm someone who loves to go and does go often on jungle safaris, and I would rather go on a forest trail than go shopping in a mall. But this book opened my eyes wider to the natural world around me. I learned so many new things from this single book. It also gave me more books to add to my TBR list. 9 on 10 for impact. N for novelty. It's the memoir of a man who managed to calm down and settle a herd of wild rogue elephants in the African wilderness. Need I say more? 10 on 10 for novelty. E for engagement. Almost every page is an action packed adventure. I was thoroughly absorbed by the events as well as the background information. 9 on 10. D for descriptions. The whole of the African wilderness comes alive in this book. 9 on 10 for descriptions. S for sense, also known as logic. The main story and sub stories and general information are expertly woven together in a logical, easy to follow sequence. 9 on 10. C for characters. The different elephants also have personalities, and Lawrence Anthony does justice to the human as well as the non human characters in the story, including his adorable dog Max. 8 on 10. A for aesthetics. 8 on 10. The front cover with the elephants from Thula Thula and the back cover with Anthony are eye catching. The color photos inside the book are a wonderful bonus. It's especially interesting to see them after you read the book and can relate the photos to the people, places, and animals in the book. P for plot, 10 on 10. It's a brilliantly laid out factual story. E for enjoyment. This book is a real life adventure that can beat any novel, 9 on 10. That gives us a total score of 91 on 100, which translates into a solid 5 stars. Woohoo! Now it's time to put my thoughts.
In a nutshell,
A newspaper once called Lawrence Anthony the Indiana Jones of conservation, and the elephant whisperer helps to explain why. He rescued a herd of wild elephants and stopped them from being killed. He did it because of his immense love, respect, and compassion for them. How he managed to communicate those feelings to the elephants and win their trust is the crux of the story. The scope of the book is vast because, along with the story of Lawrence Anthony and the elephants, it covers interesting information about flora and fauna as well as the tribes and culture of Africa. It's tightly written, fast paced, and exciting. This is non fiction at its entertaining best. The Elephant Whisperer is a memoir that rates a full 5 stars in my Lindscape rating system. Let me know in the comments if you have read the book. If you haven't, then I definitely recommend reading it. So go get your copy and immerse yourself into the African wilderness. You can buy it from the link to the book on Amazon in the description below. Finally, I must tell you that I upload a fresh episode every week. So if you're always looking for a good book to curl up with, do hit the subscribe button. Also, hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. And please share with your friends and family. The more, the merrier. This is Ashu signing off for now. And until the next time, have fun under the reading lamp. Switch on, read on.